If you think modern fashion can be a little uncomfortable or impractical, well, just wait until you see what women were strapping to their bodies in the late 19th century. But as we're going to discover today, this wasn't just about looking a certain way. Oh no. This is a fascinating story about brilliant engineering, hidden economies, and believe it or not, an accidental rebellion. So why did Victorian women actually wear bustles? Let's find out. But before we get to the bustle itself, we really have to understand what it replaced. 3,000. Between 1850 and 1860, an estimated 3,000 women in England alone died. And they didn't die from factory accidents or disease, but quite literally because of their skirts. They were wearing this massive bell-shaped cage called the crinoline, and it had a truly fatal design flaw. Section 1, the deadly crinoline era. Now, these weren't just obscure tragedies we're talking about here. These fires claimed the lives of high-profile figures and made international newspaper headlines. For example, Fanny Longfellow, the wife of the famous poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, died in 1861 when a single drop of sealing wax ignited her dress. Two of Oscar Wilde's half-sisters died when their crinolines caught fire at a party in 1871. The stakes of Victorian fashion were absolutely, quite literally, life or death. And to understand why this kept happening, we just have to look at the sheer scale of the crinoline. It was essentially a giant dome of steel hoops, completely covered in highly flammable cotton and gauze, and it spanned up to 6 feet across. Stand a little too close to a fireplace, brush past a candle, and the whole thing went up in seconds. But even beyond that deadly fire hazard, it was just completely impractical for a rapidly modernizing society. Imagine trying to walk down a crowded London street, taking up 6 feet of horizontal floor space in every single direction. These cages tilted on stairs, they constantly knocked over furniture, and two women in full crinolines couldn't even walk side by side through a standard doorway. It was a disaster. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the bustle had to happen. Enter Alexander Douglas, a New York man who first patented the bustle in 1857. This was, essentially, the ultimate engineering solution to the spatial crisis of the crinoline. Instead of a massive circle radiating outward in every direction, you were slimmed down from the front and the sides, with all that dramatic volume pushed completely to the rear. Suddenly, a woman in a bustle could finally walk through a crowded theater, sit in a carriage, and navigate a busy sidewalk without knocking things over or catching fire. A real game changer. Section 2. Engineering the bustle. Now, it actually took about a decade for this new silhouette to really catch on. People are stubborn, right? But to understand why the transition finally happened, we have to look beyond just safety and engineering. We really need to follow the money, straight to an Englishman working in Paris named Charles Frederick Worth. Worth was an incredibly influential guy. He essentially invented the modern fashion label. He dressed Empress Eugenie, the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, you name it. By 1870, he saw that the crinoline had completely peaked, but Worth was a very shrewd businessman. You see, the massive textile mills of Lyon and Paris depended on his designs consuming enormous quantities of luxury fabric. If skirts suddenly got small and simple, well, his supply chain would collapse entirely. So he championed the bustle. He didn't actually reduce the amount of fabric used, he just pushed it all to the back in these elaborate pleats and trains, ensuring his mills kept weaving and the money kept flowing. Section 3. Economics and extreme shapes. Of course, Worth was also tapping into some pretty complex cultural beauty standards at the time. The bustle deliberately exaggerated the rear silhouette, essentially constructing a body shape that biology simply didn't provide. The fashionable Victorian woman was expected to be visually impressive and highly ornamental, and the bustle made that ambition very literal by completely reshaping her form. But as we track its evolution over time, things start to get a bit absurd. In 1870, the very first bustle was relatively soft and round, just a horsehair cushion or a gentle puff. Then, in the late 1870s, it actually almost disappeared during a period of slimmer, natural form dresses. But then, boom. By 1880, the bustle came roaring back for its second era, and this time, it was terrifyingly rigid. It became this literal shelf protruding horizontally from the waist. Contemporary observers actually used to joke that you could balance an entire tea service on the back of a woman's dress. I mean, just look at the wild materials they were using to build these contraptions. Patent offices were absolutely flooded with new designs. We went from basic horsehair padding to woven wire mesh that was actively marketed as uncrushable. They even had collapsible, spring-loaded steel cages. The whole idea was they would fold up when a woman sat down and then instantly spring back into a shelf when she stood up. And if that wasn't enough, inventors introduced gutta percha, which was actual, literal, inflatable rubber bladders. And remember, all of this immense engineering was completely hidden, tucked entirely out of sight beneath 15 pounds of underwear and heavy skirts. And the crazy thing is, women were genuinely proud of this hidden tech. In 1888, one woman actually declared to a newspaper her absolute pride in wearing, quote, a steel-ribbed, brass-riveted, burglar and rust-proof bustle, a joy beyond compare. Burglar-proof. She was bragging about her underwear being burglar-proof. Seriously, getting dressed back then meant layering a corset, multiple petticoats, this massive steel cage, and then a heavy fitted dress right over the top of it. It was quite literally like strapping an upholstered Victorian sofa to your waist. But, as you might guess, all this cutting-edge technology wasn't without its own bizarre hazards. Get this, in September of 1888, a woman wearing one of those fancy, new inflatable rubber bustles attended a quiet, respectable public address given by Charles Dickens' son. And right in the middle of the event, pop, the rubber bladder literally exploded. So yes, Victorian women in polite society were occasionally walking around with explosive balloons strapped to their backsides, and everyone just called it high fashion.
Section 4. The secret smuggling economy.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that while explosive underwear is a pretty funny image, this massive hidden space under the skirt actually led to a massive, unexpected plot twist in our story. It accidentally birthed a booming international tax evasion operation. See, in the late 19th century, American tariffs on imported European luxury goods were incredibly steep. So dressmakers and professional milliners traveling back from Paris realized something brilliant. That enormous void under a bustled skirt was the absolute ultimate cargo hold. The New York Times even coined a specific term for it, calling it fashionable smuggling. These seamstresses knew exactly how to stitch hidden pockets into their petticoats and wire cages to completely outsmart the customs inspectors. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, here is the exact inventory of contraband that one single, highly skilled milliner successfully hid under her skirts when she finally got caught. Ready for this? 1,000 yards of lace, 6 bottles of Parisian perfume, massive lengths of French silk, 3 dozen pairs of Italian gloves, and 12 bottles of brandy. It's incredible. This secret smuggling economy was absolutely huge. It actually gave working-class dressmakers immense financial independence and economic agency, entirely outside of the normal male-dominated business channels. I mean, they were literally running international supply chains right under their skirts.
Section 5. Health and rational dress. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with the bustle, and a societal backlash was definitely brewing. Throughout the 1880s, doctors became increasingly vocal about the medical toll this was taking. They warned that these heavy, steel-ribbed contraptions, when combined with tightly laced corsets, twisted bodies completely out of natural alignment. It shifted a woman's center of gravity backward and caused severe spinal strain and exhaustion. Over time, this medical critique actually evolved into a full-blown reform movement. In 1881, Florence Wallace Pomeroy, the Viscountess Harberton, founded the Rational Dress Society. Their mission was pretty simple but highly defiant. They demanded practical clothing that didn't deform the figure, impede movement, or injure a woman's health. They pushed gently for things like divided skirts and comfortable layers, and naturally, the Victorian press relentlessly mocked them for it, basically labeling these reformers as pantaloon addicts.
Section 6. Bicycles and women's freedom.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because despite all the medical warnings and those rational dress campaigns, the thing that finally killed the bustle wasn't a doctor or a protest. It was actually a machine, the Rover safety bicycle, introduced in the mid-1880s. So picture this. On one side, you have the bustle, 15 pounds of rigid fabric, a steel shelf, and a tightly laced corset that completely restricted your breathing. And on the other side, you have the safety bicycle, this amazing new invention that required leg clearance, deep breathing, and entirely unrestricted physical movement. As it turns out, it is completely impossible to pedal a bicycle with a spring-loaded steel shelf strapped to your backside. Women simply had to choose between their bustles and the ultimate liberating technology of their era. And thankfully, they chose the bicycle. This clash between fashion and physical freedom finally came to a head in 1898. Lady Harberton, yes, the founder of the Rational Dress Society, rode her bicycle to the Hot Boy Hotel in Surrey. But when she got there, they actually refused to serve her in the main dining room, simply because she was wearing cycling trousers instead of a proper dress. So what did she do? She sued them. And while she lost on a minor technicality, the lawsuit made national news. This was the exact moment the push for practical clothing shifted from a fringe, eccentric cause into a legitimate, undeniable public conversation about a woman's fundamental right to move freely in society. The evolution of this single garment is honestly just incredible. Let's look at the steps here. First, women adopted the bustle to escape the deadly flaming cages of the crinoline. Second, they used its absurd hidden spaces to establish lucrative smuggling rings, finding a completely new path to financial independence. Third, the sheer ridiculous weight of the garment eventually forced them to demand practical cycling wear, which granted them unprecedented physical mobility. And finally, those exact same dress reformers like Viscountess Harberton directly transitioned all their energy into the fight for women's suffrage. So this ridiculous padded undergarment accidentally engineered a clear, multi-step path straight to voting rights and bodily autonomy.
Which leaves us with a fascinating thought to take away from this explainer. You know, we look back at the Victorian bustle today and we laugh at the steel cages and the explosive rubber bladders, but fashion is never just about fabric, is it? It dictates who can move, how they work, and what they can ultimately achieve. So I'll leave you with this. What modern fashion trends are secretly shaping our society today? What's restricting us, or perhaps giving us freedoms we haven't even fully recognized yet? Thanks for joining me on this journey, and keep questioning what you see.